They called her the Invisible Woman. For 20 years, she stood silently beside him, fixing his tie, raising his children, and smiling for the cameras while he took credit for an empire she built. But silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's just the calm before the storm, when a billionaire's arrogance leads him to bring his mistress to their anniversary gala and lets her humiliate his wife in front of New York's elite. He forgets one crucial detail. He might wear the crown, but she owns the kingdom. Watch what happens when the quiet wife signs a single document that leaves an entire room gasping for air. This is the story of how Victoria Sterling didn't just get even. She took everything. The chandeliers inside the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel on Fifth Avenue didn't just sparkle. They seemed to judge. It was a Tuesday night in late October, the kind of crisp New York evening where the air smelled of roasted chestnuts and exhaust fumes, but inside, the air smelled only of expensive perfume and old money. Victoria Sterling sat alone at table 1. It was the prime table, the center of gravity for the entire tech-forward charity gala, an event designed to celebrate the upcoming merger between Sterling Dynamics and the massive global conglomerate Kincaid Industries. At 45, Victoria possessed a beauty that was often overlooked by those dazzled by flashier things. She wore a midnight blue velvet gown by Oscar de la Renta, high-necked and long-sleeved, elegant but conservative. Her hair, a chestnut shade beginning to show dignified streaks of silver, was pulled back into a severe chignon. She sipped her sparkling water, watching the room fill up. She was Mrs. Bradford Sterling. To the world, she was the housewife who got lucky, the woman who married Bradford right before his first tech startup exploded in the early 2000s. The narrative in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal was always the same. Bradford was the visionary, the genius, the shark. Victoria was the support system, the one who managed the home fronts in the Hamptons and Aspen, so Brad could conquer the world. Victoria checked her watch, a vintage Cartier tank that had belonged to her grandfather. It was 7:15 p.m. Brad was 45 minutes late. Mrs. Sterling. Victoria looked up to see Marcus Kincaid standing there. He was the CEO of Kincaid Industries, the man Brad was desperate to impress. If the contract was signed tonight, Sterling Dynamics would triple in value overnight. "Marcus," Victoria said, offering a practiced, warm smile. "Please, sit. Brad should be here momentarily. He mentioned a last-minute conference call with the Singapore team." Marcus sat, smoothing his tuxedo jacket. He was a sharp man, observant. He looked at the empty chair beside Victoria. "He's cutting it close, Victoria. The press is already setting up the cameras for the signing ceremony at 9. If this merger is going to happen, I need to know the leadership is stable." "Brad is nothing, if not dramatic with his entrances," Victoria said smoothly, covering for her husband as she had done for 2 decades. "But he is reliable where it counts, Marcus. The intellectual property rights for the new microchip architecture are fully secured. I reviewed the final addendums myself this morning." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You reviewed them?" Victoria took a sip of water. "I like to stay informed." She didn't tell him that she hadn't just reviewed them. She had drafted the original patent filings 20 years ago. She didn't tell him that Sterling Dynamics was a shell company, a brand name. The actual assets, the patents, the real estate, the server farms, were held by a quiet, private trust called the VAS Trust. VAS stood for Victoria and Sterling. Bradford knew this, of course, but over the years, as his ego swelled with magazine covers and television interviews, he had conveniently forgotten who actually held the keys to the castle. He had started to believe his own myth, that he was the king, and she was just a passenger. "Well," Marcus said, checking his phone. "I hope he arrives soon. Rumor has it he's been distracted lately." Victoria's expression didn't change, though her stomach tightened. She knew what distracted meant. It meant Chantel. Chantel was 23. She was an influencer with 2 million followers who posted photos of herself on yachts that Victoria paid for. Brad had been seeing her for 6 months. He wasn't even subtle about it anymore. There were credit card charges for jewelry from chaotic brands Victoria wouldn't be caught dead wearing, and weekend trips to Miami disguised as investor meetings. Victoria had tolerated it. She had tolerated it because of the children, twins now away at university, and because, frankly, she was tired. Divorce was messy. It required energy she wasn't sure she had. She was content to live her separate life, run the charitable arm of the company, and let Brad play the big man. But tonight was different. Tonight was the Kincaid merger. It was the culmination of 10 years of Victoria's strategic planning. She needed Brad to show up, look the part of the devoted husband and brilliant CEO, sign the papers, and secure their children's legacy. "He'll be here," Victoria said, her voice steady. Just then, a hush fell over the room. It started at the grand double doors and rippled inward, like a wave of silence crashing against the shore of chatter. Marcus turned. Victoria froze. Bradford Sterling had arrived. But he wasn't alone. Bradford Sterling looked every inch the billionaire playboy. He was wearing a custom Tom Ford tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, his hair gelled back, a blinding smile plastered on his face. He walked with the swagger of a man who owned the room. Linked on his arm was not a business associate. It wasn't his lawyer. It was Chantel. She was wearing a dress that left very little to the imagination. A sheer, sparkling red number that looked more appropriate for a Las Vegas nightclub than a black tie business gala. It was slashed to the hip and plunged to the navel. She was beautiful, undeniably, but it was a loud, aggressive beauty. She was chewing gum, snapping it softly as she scanned the room, looking for cameras. The silence in the room was deafening. Every head turned. The board members of Sterling Dynamics looked horrified. The investors from Kincaid Industries looked confused. Victoria felt a cold numbness spread from her fingertips up her arms. This wasn't just an affair anymore. This was a declaration of war. Bringing a mistress to the company's most important business dinner? It was professional suicide. It was a public slap in the face to Victoria. Bradford spotted table 1. He waved at Marcus Kincaid as if nothing were wrong, guiding Chantel through the tables. He didn't look ashamed. He looked proud. "Sorry we're late," Brad boomed, his voice carrying over the silent room. Traffic on the bridge was a nightmare, and Chantel here had a wardrobe malfunction we had to fix. He laughed. No one else did. Brad pulled out a chair, not for Victoria, but for Chantel, placing her right between himself and Marcus Kincaid. "Marcus," Brad said, reaching across Chantel to shake the CEO's hand. "Good to see you. You remember Chantel? She's doing the social media for the launch." Marcus looked at Chantel, then at Victoria. His face was unreadable, a mask of corporate stoicism. "I don't believe we've met properly." "Hi," Chantel said, popping her gum again. She didn't offer a hand. She looked at Victoria, sitting on the other side of Brad. Her eyes narrowed with a smirk that was pure malice. "Oh, hi, Mrs. Sterling. Brad said you might not make it tonight. He said your back was acting up again? Or was it a migraine? You know, old age things." The insult hung in the air, toxic and heavy. Victoria slowly set her water glass down. She didn't look at Chantel. She looked at her husband. "Brad," Victoria said, her voice low, "can I have a word with you, in private?" Brad waved a hand dismissively, pouring himself a glass of champagne. "Oh, relax, Vicky. Don't be such a buzzkill. We're celebrating. The merger is practically done. Chantel wanted to see what a billion-dollar deal looks like." "This is a board dinner, Brad," Victoria said, her tone hardening. "It is not a social outing." "It is whatever I say it is," Brad snapped, his smile dropping for a fraction of a second. "I built this company. I decide who sits at my table." He turned his back on her, focusing his attention on Marcus. "So, Marcus, the valuation numbers. I was thinking, once we sign, we should look into rebranding the Asian division. Chantel had some great ideas about using TikTok for the marketing." Marcus Kincaid looked at Brad as if he had grown a second head. "Brad, we are talking about military-grade microchip architecture. I don't think TikTok is our demographic." "You have to adapt or die, Marcus." Brad laughed, slapping Marcus on the shoulder. Victoria sat there, essentially invisible. The waiters began to serve the first course, a lobster bisque. She watched as Chantel picked up the wrong spoon, loudly slurping the soup while texting on her phone with her free hand. The whispers in the room were growing louder. Victoria could hear snippets of conversation from the tables nearby. "Can you believe he brought her? Look at poor Victoria. Does he want to tank the stock price before the deal is even signed?" Victoria closed her eyes for a brief second. She took a deep breath. She had given him 20 years. She had given him the patents. She had given him the connections. She had let him play king. And he had brought a court jester to mock her in her own court. She opened her eyes. The sadness was gone. It was replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. "Brad," she said again. "What?" Brad snapped, his mouth full of bread. "I need you to ask your guest to leave. Now." Chantel laughed, a high-pitched, grating sound. "Guest? Honey, I'm the future. You're the past. Brad told me everything. He said the only reason he hasn't served you papers yet is because he didn't want to upset you before the holidays. But since we're all here—" Chantel leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, mocking whisper that was loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Why don't you just go home, Vicky? Go knit something. Brad needs energy. He needs youth. He needs someone who matches his status." Victoria looked at Brad. "Is that true, Brad? You're planning to serve me papers?" Brad looked uncomfortable for the first time, but he was too arrogant to back down in front of his mistress and his business rival. He took a swig of champagne. "Look, Victoria, we've grown apart. It happens. Chantel understands the new direction of the company. She inspires me. We can discuss the settlement tomorrow. But for now, don't make a scene. You're embarrassing yourself." "Embarrassing myself," Victoria thought. "Very well," Victoria said softly. She reached for her purse. For a moment, Brad looked relieved, thinking she was going to leave. But she didn't stand up. She pulled out a slim, leather-bound notebook and a fountain pen. The arrival of the main course, filet mignon with truffle reduction, was interrupted by Chantel's sudden desire for attention. She seemed to sense that the conversation was drifting back to business, a language she didn't speak. "This meat is tough," she complained loudly, dropping her fork onto the fine china with a clatter. "Brad, baby, tell them to take it back. I want sushi." "We don't have sushi, Chantel." "This is a French menu," Brad whispered, his patience fraying slightly, but he forced a smile. "Just eat the salad." "I don't want salad. I'm bored," Chantel whined. She turned her gaze back to Victoria, who was writing calmly in her notebook. "What are you writing? A diary entry?" "Dear Diary, today my husband realized he's too hot for me." Chantel grabbed a glass of red wine, a 1982 Chateau Margaux that cost more than her car, and gestured wildly. You know, you should really dress more alive. That blue makes you look like a funeral drape." "It's Oscar de la Renta," Victoria said, without looking up, continuing to write. "It's boring," Chantel scoffed. Then it happened. Whether it was accidental or a calculated move to force a reaction, no one knew for sure. But as Chantel swung her arm back, the oversized goblet of red wine tipped. A dark crimson wave splashed across the table. It missed Brad. It missed Marcus. It landed squarely on Victoria. The cold liquid soaked into the heavy velvet of her gown, staining the bodice and the lap, dripping down onto the pristine white carpet of the ballroom. The room gasped. A waiter rushed forward with a napkin. "Madam, I am so sorry." Victoria didn't flinch. She sat perfectly still, the wine dripping from her elbows. Chantel covered her mouth, her eyes wide with fake innocence. "Oops, oh my God, I am so clumsy. But honestly, Vicky, that dress was ugly anyway. I did you a favor." Brad didn't ask if Victoria was okay. He didn't yell at Chantel. He looked at the stain, then looked at his watch. "For God's sake," Brad hissed at Victoria. "Now you have to go. You can't sit there looking like a crime scene. Go to the hotel room, change, or just go home. We have the signing in 20 minutes. He turned to Marcus, laughing nervously. "Women, right? Always some drama. Anyway, back to the equity split." Victoria slowly pushed her chair back. The sound of the chair legs scraping against the floor was the only sound in the room. She stood up. The wine dripped from her dress, but she stood with the posture of a queen. She looked at the waiter. "Leave it." She looked at Chantel. "You enjoy that wine. It has a complex finish, a bit like my patience." Then she turned to Bradford. Her voice wasn't loud, but it projected to the back of the room. "You want me to go, Brad?" "Yes, go!" Brad waved her away like a fly. "And you want to sign the Kincaid merger? You're ready to sign the contract." "I am the CEO, Victoria. I am signing the contract. Stop wasting our time." "Okay," Victoria said. She closed her notebook with a sharp snap. She walked around the table. She didn't head for the exit. She headed for the stage. "Where is she going?" Chantel asked, looking confused. "Victoria," Brad hissed. "Get down from there." Victoria walked up the stairs to the small podium where the microphone was set up for the speeches later that evening. She tapped the microphone. Thump, thump. The sound echoed through the speakers, silencing the few people who were still whispering. "Good evening, everyone," Victoria said. Her voice was calm, melodic, and terrifyingly composed. "I apologize for the interruption, and for my appearance. As you can see, we've had a little spill." She looked down at Brad, who was now standing up, his face red with anger. "My husband, Bradford Sterling, has informed me that he wishes to sign the merger contract with Kincaid Industries tonight. He has also informed me, quite publicly, that he intends to divorce me to pursue a new future with his associate, Miss Chantel." The crowd murmured. Marcus Kincaid was watching Victoria intensely, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. "However," Victoria continued, "there seems to be a slight administrative error that Bradford has overlooked in his excitement." She reached into her stained dress and pulled out a phone. She dialed a number and held the phone up to the microphone. It rang once, twice. "Hello? This is Sterling Legal," a voice answered on speaker. It was Mr. Henderson, the company's chief corporate counsel. "Henderson," Victoria said. "This is Victoria." "Mrs. Sterling, is everything all right?" "No, Henderson. It appears we have a breach of the morality clause in the primary trust agreement. Also, I am enacting Article 4, Section B of the Sterling Holdings Charter." Bradford froze. His face went pale. He knew those words. He hadn't heard them in 20 years, but he knew them. Article 4? Henderson's voice sounded shaky. Mrs. Sterling, that freezes all assets, that revokes the operational license of the subsidiary. Are you sure? I am sure, Victoria said, her eyes locked on Brad's. Effective immediately. Please revoke the signatory powers of the current CEO of Sterling Dynamics and cancel the lease on the headquarters. I believe the VAS Trust has other plans for that building. Understood. Initiating protocol now, Henderson said. Victoria hung up. She looked at the crowd. I am sorry to spoil the party, but unfortunately, there will be no merger tonight. Sterling Dynamics no longer has a CEO, nor does it have a building to operate out of. In fact, as of 30 seconds ago, Sterling Dynamics is technically insolvent. She looked at Marcus Kincaid. Marcus, I apologize for the inconvenience, but you cannot merge with a company that doesn't exist. She looked down at Brad. He was trembling. Chantel was looking at him, confused. Brad, what does she mean? What is she talking about? You said you owned everything. Victoria leaned into the mic one last time. He owns the suits, Chantel, and the car. But the company, the patents, the money? Victoria smiled, a cold, dazzling smile. I own it all. The silence that followed Victoria's declaration was heavier than the crystal chandeliers hanging overhead. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the vacuum of a bomb that had just detonated, but hadn't yet registered the sound. Bradford Sterling stood by the table, his face a mask of contorted confusion. His knuckles were white as he gripped the back of his chair. For a man who prided himself on controlling every room he entered, the sudden shift in gravity had left him reeling. You're lying, Brad choked out. His voice cracked, stripping away the polished CEO baritone he had cultivated for years. He looked around the room, desperate for an ally. She's lying. She's obviously had too much to drink. Look at her. She's covered in wine. She's hysterical. He pointed an accusatory finger at Victoria, who stood on the podium, serene and untouched by his panic. Security, Brad yelled, waving at the men in black suits standing by the doors. Remove this woman. She is disrupting a private corporate event. The head of security, a large man named Miller, who had worked for the Sterling family for 12 years, took a step forward. But he didn't move toward Victoria. He walked past the tables, past the frightened waiters, and stopped in front of the podium. He turned around, crossed his arms, and faced Bradford. He was protecting Victoria. Miller, what are you doing? Brad screamed, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. I pay your salary. Get her out of here. Actually, sir, Miller said, his voice deep and rumbling, carrying easily through the quiet room. Technically, VAS, Trust pays my salary, and the trustee is Mrs. Sterling. I take my orders from the check signer. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. The board members of Sterling Dynamics, men and women who had flown in from London, Tokyo, and Zurich, began to exchange frantic whispers. They pulled out their tablets and phones, frantically checking company bylaws and organizational charts. Marcus Kincaid, the shark in the water, hadn't moved. He was still sitting at table 1, his eyes narrowed as he processed the new data. He slowly wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, placed it on the table and stood up. Bradford, Marcus said. His voice wasn't loud, but it commanded instant attention. Brad spun around, looking relieved. Marcus, you see this circus? I apologize. My wife is obviously having a breakdown. Ignore this. Let's go to the private suite upstairs and sign the papers. We don't need this drama. Sit down, Bradford, Marcus said coldly. What? I said, sit down. Marcus turned his gaze to the podium. Mrs. Sterling, you mentioned the VAS Trust. I'm familiar with the entity. It's the holding company listed as the primary shareholder in our due diligence reports. We were told VAS stood for Virtual Asset Systems. Victoria smiled thinly, a convenient acronym my husband invented to soothe his ego. But if you check the incorporation papers from 2003, filed in Delaware, you will see the full name. Victoria Ann Sterling, Marcus deduced. Correct. And the patents? Marcus asked, stepping away from the table and walking toward the stage, ignoring Brad entirely. The hyperthreading architecture? The cooling systems? The core IP that Kincaid Industries is buying? My designs, Victoria said simply. I hold a PhD in electrical engineering from MIT, Mr. Kincaid. Brad was a marketing major. He sold the vision. I built the machine. Every patent is in my name, licensed to Sterling Dynamics on a renewable 5-year basis. She paused for effect, her eyes scanning the room. And as of tonight, I have chosen not to renew that license. The gasp from the room was audible. Without the patents, Sterling Dynamics was nothing but a logo and some rented office furniture. The stock value would be 0 by morning. Bradford looked like he had been punched in the gut. He rushed toward Marcus, grabbing his arm. She's bluffing! Marcus, she's a housewife. She plans charity galas. She doesn't know anything about engineering. I'm the genius here. I built this. Did you? Victoria asked from the stage. Brad, tell Mr. Kincaid how the quantum stabilizing loop works in the new prototype. It's technical, Brad stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. It's complex. It's not complex, Victoria countered. It's an inverted feedback loop based on the Kelvin scale, basic thermodynamics. But you wouldn't know that, because you've never stepped foot in the lab. Brad was hyperventilating now. He looked at Chantel, who was still sitting at the table, looking bored and annoyed. Brad, Chantel whined, loudly enough for the microphone to pick up. This is boring. Can we just leave? You said we were going to Paris tomorrow on the jet. Let's just go now. Victoria laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. The jet, Victoria repeated into the mic. The Gulfstream G650, tail number N45VS, VS standing for Victoria Sterling. She looked down at her phone, tapping the screen a few times. I've just grounded it. The pilot has been instructed to return the aircraft to the hangar in Teterboro. I'm afraid there will be no Paris, Chantel. Chantel stood up, her eyes flashing with anger. You can't do that! Brad promised! He said it's his plane! He lied, Victoria said. Brad! Chantel stomped her foot, her high heel clicking sharply on the floor. Tell her to stop. You're the billionaire. Fix this. Brad turned to Victoria, his eyes pleading now. The arrogance was melting away, revealing the terrified fraud beneath. Vicky, honey, let's not do this here. Please, you're humiliated. I get it. I made a mistake bringing her. Okay? I admit it. Bad call. But don't burn the house down just to kill a spider. Think about the company. Think about the employees. I am thinking about them, Victoria said. That's why I'm taking the company back, before you run it into the ground with your negligence. She turned to the crowd of stunned investors and board members. Ladies and gentlemen, the dinner is over. I suggest you check your portfolios. Sterling Dynamics trading has been suspended, pending an internal investigation into the misappropriation of funds by the CEO. Misappropriation? Brad squeaked. Using company accounts to fund a mistress's lifestyle is fraud, Brad, Victoria said, her voice dropping an octave. $2 million in jewelry, the condo in Miami, the yacht rentals. It's all in the forensic accounting report I received this afternoon. She held up the leather notebook. It's all here, and the district attorney already has a copy. The words district attorney hung in the air like smoke. If Part 4 was the trial, Part 5 was the execution. The mention of law enforcement broke the paralysis in the room. The board members, realizing their own liability was at stake, immediately distanced themselves. 3 of the senior directors stood up and walked out of the ballroom without looking at Brad. Marcus Kincaid, however, was a predator who smelled blood. He walked up to the stage, standing just below Victoria. "Mrs. Sterling," Marcus said, his voice respectful. "If you own the IP and you control the trust, then my business is with you. Not him." He gestured vaguely behind him at Brad, dismissing the man who had been his equal 5 minutes ago, as if he were a waiter. "We can discuss terms," Victoria replied, looking down at him. "But the price has gone up, and the name on the building changes." "I'm listening," Marcus said. Behind them, the reality was crashing down on Bradford Sterling. He pulled out his phone, frantically trying to access his banking app. "Access denied," he muttered, staring at the screen. He tried another account. "Account frozen." He looked up, his eyes wild. "Vicky, you froze the joint accounts? How am I supposed to—" "I have bills. I have the mortgage on the penthouse." "The penthouse is in the trust," Victoria reminded him from the stage. "And I've changed the locks. Your things have been packed. They are currently being delivered to the Motel 6 on the Jersey Turnpike. I prepaid for 3 nights. I'm not cruel." A few people in the back of the room stifled laughs. Chantel, realizing the ship was sinking, made her move. She looked at Brad, who was sweating through his Tom Ford tuxedo, looking aged and pathetic. She looked at Victoria, who stood like a statue of justice. Then she looked at Marcus Kincaid. "So," Chantel said, stepping toward Marcus, flipping her hair. "You're the new boss?" "I'm Chantel. I have a lot of followers. Maybe I could help Kincaid Industries with their branding?" She reached out to touch Marcus's arm. Marcus recoiled as if she were radioactive. "Don't touch me." He turned to security. "Please escort this woman out. She's trespassing." "Trespassing?" Chantel shrieked. "I'm the guest of honor." "You're a liability," Marcus said coldly. 2 security guards moved in. Chantel screamed, grabbing her purse. "Brad, do something! You coward! You said you were the King of New York!" Brad didn't answer. He was staring at his phone, watching his life dissolve in real-time notifications. Alert: corporate Amex declined. Alert: Tesla lease voided. Alert: club membership suspended. Chantel was dragged out, cursing and screaming, her red dress flashing as she kicked at the guards. The doors slammed shut behind her, cutting off her voice. Now it was just Brad. He looked small. The grand ballroom, with its high ceilings and gold leaf trim, seemed to swallow him whole. He looked at the table where he had sat so arrogantly just 20 minutes ago. The spilled wine on the white tablecloth looked like a wound. He looked up at Victoria. "Vicky," he whispered, "we've been married 22 years. Doesn't that mean anything?" Victoria walked down the stairs of the stage. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. She walked until she was standing toe-to-toe with him. She smelled of the expensive wine he had allowed his mistress to spill on her. "It meant everything to me, Brad," she said softly. "I built you. I supported you. I raised our children while you played golf and chased skirts. I stayed silent when you took credit for my work, because I loved you, and I wanted you to feel important." She reached out and straightened his bow tie, a habit she had performed 1,000 times. "But you broke the one rule," she said. "You brought her into my house. You humiliated me in front of my peers. You mistook my silence for submission." She patted his chest, right over his heart. "You wanted a trophy wife, Brad, but you forgot to check if the trophy was loaded." She stepped back. "I want a divorce. My lawyers will be in touch. In the meantime, you have no access to company grounds. You have no car. You have no home. I suggest you start walking. It's a long way to New Jersey." Brad looked around. No one would meet his eyes. The tech giants, the politicians, the bankers, they all looked away. He was radioactive. "Marcus!" Brad tried one last time. Marcus didn't even look up from his phone. "I'm busy, Mr. Sterling. I'm negotiating a merger with the owner of the company." Bradford Sterling, the man who had been on the cover of Time magazine just last month, let out a sob. It was a pathetic, broken sound. He turned and began the long walk to the exit. His shoulders were slumped, his gait shuffling. He didn't look like a billionaire anymore. He looked like exactly what he was, a man who had lost everything because he didn't appreciate what he had. As the doors closed behind him, the room remained silent for a heartbeat. Then Victoria Sterling turned to the head waiter. "I believe," she said, her voice clear and steady, "that we ordered dessert, and please bring a fresh bottle of wine. I find myself in a celebratory mood." For a second, no one moved. Then Marcus Kincaid began to clap. It started slow. Clap, clap, clap. Then the board members joined in. Then the investors. Then the waiters. Within 10 seconds, the entire ballroom was on its feet, giving a standing ovation to the woman in the wine-stained blue dress. Victoria didn't bow. She simply nodded, walked back to table 1, and sat down in the CEO's chair. But the story wasn't over. As the applause died down, a man in a grey suit entered the room from a side door. He wasn't a waiter. He wasn't a guest. He was carrying a briefcase, and he looked grim. He walked straight to Victoria's table. "Mrs. Sterling?" the man asked. "Yes?" "I'm Agent Reynolds, FBI, Financial Crimes Division," he said, flashing a badge. "We received your tip about the embezzlement. We're grateful. But there's a complication." Victoria frowned. "What complication?" "I gave you all the evidence on Bradford." "It's not about Bradford," the agent said, lowering his voice. "The forensic audit you sent over, it flagged something else. Something buried deep in the Kincaid Industries merger files." Victoria froze. She looked at Marcus Kincaid, who was sitting right next to her. Marcus had stopped smiling. His hand was slowly moving toward the steak knife on the table. "It seems," the agent continued, watching Marcus closely, "that Mr. Sterling wasn't the only one cooking the books. Kincaid Industries is a Ponzi scheme, and they were using this merger to cover up a $4 billion deficit." Victoria's eyes widened. She had just destroyed her husband to save her company, only to hand it over to a bigger monster. The twist had just twisted again. The atmosphere in the grand ballroom had shifted from a wedding reception to a crime thriller in the span of a single breath. The air was thick with tension, the kind that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Marcus Kincaid, the titan of industry, the man whose face graced the cover of Fortune magazine as the visionary of the decade, sat frozen. His hand, which had been inching toward the serrated steak knife, hovered tremulously over the tablecloth. Agent Reynolds stepped closer, his hand resting instinctively near his holster inside his jacket. "Mr. Kincaid, keep your hands where I can see them." Marcus slowly retracted his hand. He looked at the FBI agent, then at the stunned crowd, and finally his gaze landed on Victoria. A slow, venomous smile spread across his face. It wasn't the smile of a defeated man. It was the smile of a gambler who had one card left to play. "You think you're clever, don't you, Victoria?" Marcus said, his voice smooth as silk, despite the impending doom. He picked up his wine glass and took a leisurely sip. "You took down your husband. Bravo. But you don't understand how the game is played at my level. "Enlighten me," Victoria said, crossing her arms. She didn't flinch. She stood her ground, the wine stain on her dress now looking less like a mess and more like battle armor. "Kincaid Industries isn't just a company," Marcus whispered, leaning in so only Victoria and the agent could hear, though the microphone on the podium picked up the ambient tension. "It's a systemic pillar. If you arrest me, if this news breaks tonight, the tech sector crashes. Your company, this VAS trust you're so proud of, will lose 40% of its value by morning. The panic will wipe you out too." He leaned back, looking satisfied. "So here is the deal. Agent Reynolds walks away. We sign the merger. I absorb your little company, bury the debt in the transition, and we both walk away billionaires. You get rid of Brad, and you get to keep your fortune, or you burn me, and you burn yourself." The room watched, breathless. They didn't hear the whisper, but they saw the negotiation. They saw the two titans locking horns. Victoria looked at Agent Reynolds. The agent looked ready to cuff Marcus, but he waited for Victoria's signal. It was highly irregular. But in this room, money was the real law, and Victoria held the checkbook. Victoria sighed. She walked over to the table and picked up the contract, the merger document that Brad had been so desperate to sign. She flipped through the pages, the crisp sound of paper echoing in the silence. "You make a compelling argument, Marcus," Victoria said loudly. "Mutual destruction is a powerful deterrent." Marcus smirked. "I knew you were a pragmatist." "However," Victoria continued, her voice hardening, "you made the same mistake Brad did. You assumed I only look at the surface." She tossed the contract onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud. "I knew about the Ponzi scheme 3 months ago, Marcus." Marcus's smirk vanished. "What?" "When Brad first proposed this merger, I didn't just audit Sterling Dynamics," Victoria explained, pacing slowly around the table like a shark circling prey. "I hired forensic analysts to look at your books. I saw the shell companies in the Cayman Islands. I saw the circular revenue streams. I knew Kincaid Industries was hollow." "Then why are we here?" Marcus hissed. "Why let it get this far?" "Because," Victoria said, leaning down so her face was inches from his, "I needed you to be in the same room as Brad. I needed the world to see that the 2 men trying to steal my life's work were both frauds. And I needed to make sure that when the stock market opens tomorrow, Sterling Dynamics is entirely disassociated from Kincaid Industries." She stood up and turned to the crowd. "There will be no merger, not because of a spilled glass of wine, but because Sterling Dynamics does not do business with criminals." She looked at Agent Reynolds. "He's all yours, Agent." Marcus slammed his fists on the table, knocking over the crystal glasses. "You can't do this. Do you know who I am? I know senators. I know judges." "And now you'll know a federal jury," Agent Reynolds said. He signaled, and 3 other agents, who had been disguised as servers, dropped their trays and moved in. The sight was surreal. The billionaire CEO was hauled out of his chair, handcuffed in his tuxedo, and marched past the table where he had just been eating filet mignon. The cameras, which had been set up to record a historic signing, were now broadcasting a historic arrest live to the business news networks. As Marcus was dragged away, shouting obscenities, the room turned its attention back to the one person left standing, Victoria Sterling. She was alone at the center table. The husband was gone. The rival was gone. The mistress was gone. The board members of Sterling Dynamics, the ones who hadn't fled, looked at her with a mixture of fear and awe. One of them, a senior VP named Arthur Pendergast, cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Mrs. Sterling, Victoria," he stammered. "What happens now? The stock trading is suspended. The CEO is fired. The merger is dead. What do we tell the employees in the morning?" Victoria looked at him. She looked at the room full of panicked elites. "We tell them the truth, Arthur," she said calmly. "We tell them that the parasites have been removed." She walked back to the podium one last time. "Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., there will be an emergency board meeting. I will be assuming the role of interim CEO. We are going to reprivatize the company. No more Wall Street games. No more celebrity executives. We go back to engineering. We go back to building things that work." She paused, looking at the wine stain on her dress. "And Arthur?" "Yes, Mom?" "Find a new cleaning service for the building and fire the old PR firm. I think we've had enough spin for one lifetime." Victoria stepped down from the stage. She picked up her clutch. She didn't look back at the wreckage of the dinner. She walked toward the exit, her head high. As she passed the security guard, Miller, he opened the door for her. "Car is waiting, Mrs. Sterling," Miller said with a genuine smile. "I had them bring the rolls, not the limo. Thought you might prefer to drive yourself." Victoria smiled, a real, warm smile for the first time that night. "Thank you, Miller. You know me too well." 3 months later, the rain in New Jersey was not like the rain in Manhattan. In the city, rain against the windows of a penthouse sounded like jazz, rhythmic, distant, atmospheric. Here, off exit 13 of the turnpike, the rain sounded like gravel being thrown against cheap aluminum siding. It was a relentless, aggressive drumming that made sleep impossible. Bradford Sterling sat on the edge of the sagging mattress in room 14 of the Sleepy's Motel. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke, lemon-scented industrial cleaner, and despair. The neon sign outside, a buzzing red "No Vacancy," flickered rhythmically, casting a sickly, intermittent glow across his face. He looked at his hands. They were shaking. The manicured fingernails were gone, replaced by jagged edges he had bitten down in anxiety. The gold Rolex was gone, sold to a pawn shop in Newark 3 weeks ago to pay for a retainer on a lawyer who had eventually quit when the checks bounced. Brad pulled a prepaid burner phone from the pocket of his thrift store windbreaker. It was a cheap plastic device, a far cry from the titanium-encased smartphone that used to organize his empire. He stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over a number he had dialed 15 times in the last hour. He pressed send. "What?" The voice on the other end was sharp, impatient. Background noise, clinking glasses, loud bass music filtered through the speaker. "Chantel?" Brad's voice was raspy. He had developed a persistent cough from the drafty motel window, and he couldn't afford a prescription. "It's me. Don't hang up, please." "Oh my God," Chantel groaned. He could hear her moving away from the noise, a door closing somewhere. "Brad, I told you to stop calling me. I'm at a launch party, a real party. I need help, Chantel," Brad pleaded, the desperation leaking out of him like oil from a broken engine. "The freeze on my personal assets is absolute. The feds took the Jaguar yesterday. They found where I had it parked in storage. I have nothing left. I just need a loan. 5,000, just until the settlement clears." A cold, cruel laugh echoed through the phone. "The settlement? Brad, you are delusional," Chantel snapped. "My lawyer told me everything. You're looking at indictment for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. There is no settlement. There is only prison." "But I did it for us," Brad shouted, standing up and pacing the small, cramped room. "I took those risks to buy you the life you wanted, the diamonds, the trips. You did it for your ego." She cut him off, her voice venomous. "And you know what? You ruined me. I lost my verification blue tick because of the investigation. I lost my brand deal with that skincare line. Do you know how hard it is to get invited to Fashion Week when you're linked to a broke criminal? I'm still Bradford Sterling, he insisted, though his voice cracked on the name. No, Chantel corrected him. You're a ghost. And by the way, I'm seeing someone else. He's a producer for Netflix. He's doing a documentary about corporate downfalls. Maybe I'll tell him about you. Click. The line went dead. Brad stared at the phone in disbelief. A scream built up in his throat, a primal sound of rage and loss, and he hurled the phone across the room. It smashed against the wall, the plastic casing shattering, the battery skittering under the radiator. Silence returned to the room, save for the buzzing neon sign. He couldn't stay here. The walls were closing in. He grabbed his coat, a generic grey raincoat that was 2 sizes too big, and walked out into the storm. He didn't have a car anymore. He walked along the side of the highway, the freezing rain stinging his face. Trucks roared past, splashing him with dirty, oily water. He kept his head down, trudging forward with no destination in mind, just a need to move. A mile down the road, near the entrance to the Lincoln Tunnel, a massive digital billboard lit up the night sky. It cycled through advertisements for insurance and soda, but then it stopped on an image that made Brad freeze in his tracks. It was a picture of a woman. She was standing in a white, architectural power suit, her arms crossed confidently. A sleek, modern bob framing a face that looked radiant, intelligent, and fiercely capable. The text underneath read, "Sterling Innovations. The future is engineered." CEO, Dr. Victoria Sterling. Brad stood in the mud, water dripping off his nose, staring up at his wife. She looked 10 years younger than the woman he had ignored at the dinner table. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a queen who had finally ascended to her throne. A bitter realization clawed at his chest. He had spent 20 years thinking he was the sun, and she was just a moon reflecting his light. But standing there in the cold, he realized he had never been the light source. He had just been the object blocking her view. He needed to see her. He didn't know why. Maybe to beg? Maybe to yell? Maybe just to see if she was real. 1 hour later, Manhattan. The lobby of the Sterling Tower had been transformed. The dark, oppressive marble and gold leaf that Brad had installed in 2010 were gone. In its place was a sleek, minimalist design of white stone, living green walls, and warm, ambient lighting. It breathed success. It breathed transparency. Bradford Sterling pushed through the revolving doors, dripping wet. He looked like a drowned rat. His shoes squeaked loudly on the pristine floor. The receptionist was new. She was young, sharp, and didn't look up from her screen as he approached. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her tone polite but guarded. She likely saw a homeless man seeking shelter from the rain. "I am Bradford Sterling," he announced, trying to summon the baritone command he used to wield. But his voice was thin, weakened by the cold. "I need to see Victoria. The CEO." The receptionist paused. She typed something into her computer, then looked up at him with a mixture of confusion and pity. She didn't recognize him from the magazines. She only saw a wet, shivering man claiming to be the former owner. "1 moment, sir," she said. She picked up the phone. 40 floors above. Victoria Sterling sat at her desk, a vast expanse of tempered glass and brushed steel. The city lights of Manhattan stretched out behind her, a glittering tapestry of ambition. Arthur Pendergast, her new COO, sat across from her, reviewing the Q4 projections. "The Asian markets have responded incredibly well to the new thermal coupling technology," Arthur said, tapping his tablet. "Since we severed ties with Kincaid and rebranded, stock value is up 40%. You were right to focus on the engineering, Victoria. The market didn't want flash. They wanted function. Function is timeless, Arthur, Victoria said, signing a grant approval for a university scholarship program. Flash is just a distraction. The intercom on her desk buzzed softly. Mrs. Sterling. The receptionist's voice filled the quiet, efficient office. Yes, Sarah? I have Mr. Bradford Sterling in the lobby. He says it is an emergency. He is demanding to see you. Arthur stiffened. He looked at Victoria, concern etching his brow. Shall I call security? We have a restraining order pending, but we can have him removed immediately for trespassing. Victoria didn't look up from her paperwork immediately. She finished her signature, capped her fountain pen, the same pen she had used to write her notes during that fateful dinner, and placed it perfectly parallel to her notebook. She turned her chair toward the floor-to-ceiling window. She looked down at the streets below, tiny ribbons of light in the darkness. How does he look? Victoria asked the intercom. There was a pause. He looks unwell, Ma'am. He's soaked through. He's shivering. Victoria closed her eyes for a brief second. Memories washed over her. Not of the betrayal, but of the early days. The days before the money corrupted him, when they were just two students eating instant noodles and dreaming of the future. She didn't hate him anymore. Hate required energy. What she felt now was a distant, hollow pity. No, Arthur, Victoria said softly. Don't have him removed. You want to bring him up? Arthur asked, shocked. Absolutely not, Victoria replied, turning back to the desk. Her eyes were clear, devoid of malice, but firm as steel. He doesn't belong on this floor. This floor is for people who work. She pressed the intercom button. Sarah? Yes, Mrs. Sterling? Tell Mr. Sterling that I am currently in a meeting with our investors and cannot be disturbed. Tell him that if he has legal matters to discuss, he can contact the firm of Heavy, Weighty and Stone. Understood, Ma'am. I'll send him away. Wait, Victoria added. She glanced at the coat rack in the corner of her office. It's pouring outside, isn't it? Yes, it's a torrential downpour. Give him an umbrella, Victoria said. Give him one of the company umbrellas from the guest closet, the black ones with the new logo. Arthur looked at her, confused. Just an umbrella? Victoria offered a small, sad smile. He hates the rain, Arthur. He always complained that it ruined his Italian loafers. Let's not be cruel. Back in the lobby, Bradford stood by the security desk, his heart pounding. He watched the receptionist hang up the phone. He straightened his spine, preparing to be summoned up to the penthouse. He was ready to beg, ready to promise her anything if she would just stop the legal hounds, just give him a small allowance, just let him back into the warmth. The receptionist walked around the desk. She was carrying a long, sleek black umbrella. She stopped in front of him. She didn't invite him in. She extended the umbrella. Mrs. Sterling is unavailable, sir, the receptionist said gently. She said you are welcome to contact her legal team during business hours, but she wanted you to have this. Brad stared at the umbrella. He took it. His hands were numb. She won't see me, he whispered. No, sir. Please, you'll have to clear the lobby. We're locking the main doors in 5 minutes. A security guard, a large man named Miller, who Brad vaguely recognized from the old days, stepped forward. Miller didn't look angry. He looked sad. He opened the glass door for Brad. Take care of yourself, Mr. Sterling, Miller said quietly. Bradford turned and walked back out into the night. The door hissed shut behind him, sealing off the warmth, the smell of expensive coffee, and the hum of success. He stood on the sidewalk and clicked the button on the umbrella. It sprang open with a crisp snap. It was a high-quality canopy, sturdy against the wind. He looked up at the fabric. There, printed in white silk screen, was the new logo. Victoria's logo. He was standing under her protection, shielded by her charity, holding an object that bore her name. He looked up at the tower one last time. The lights on the 40th floor were blazing bright, a beacon in the storm. He realized then that the building had never been his. The money had never been his. Even his own comfort now, this small dry circle in the rain, was hers to give. He gripped the handle, turned his back on the empire he had lost, and began the long walk back to the bus station. Up above, Victoria watched the small black circle move away, blending into the sea of traffic and shadows. She watched until he was gone, until he was just another anonymous figure in the city. Then she took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the clean, conditioned air of her office. She felt lighter. The final thread was cut. "Arthur," she said, turning back to the room, her voice strong and vibrant. "Yes, Victoria? Let's go over the designs for the renewable energy grid. I have some ideas on how to make it more efficient." "Right away," Arthur said, smiling. Victoria picked up her pen. The past was outside in the rain. The future was on her desk, and she was ready to write it. And that is how the story of Bradford Sterling ends. Not with a bang, but with a walk in the rain, under an umbrella provided by the woman he underestimated. Victoria Sterling teaches us a powerful lesson about dignity. Revenge doesn't always have to be loud. Sometimes, the greatest revenge is simply outgrowing the people who tried to keep you small. While Brad was left with nothing but his regrets, Victoria reclaimed her name, her company, and most importantly, her peace. She proved that when you build your foundation on your own skills and intelligence, no one can tear it down. What did you think of Victoria's final gesture? Was the umbrella an act of kindness, or the ultimate power move? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit that like button. It helps the channel so much. Share this with a friend who needs a reminder of their own worth, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Stay strong, and I'll see you in the next video.